Okay, so this is going to be a little bit of a reaction to the kind of questions I'm getting. So what I noticed a lot, when being active and maybe in Reddit, maybe my personal life, maybe like wherever developers exchange ideas, whether it be Stack Overflow, whatever, the amount of absolute beginners, and when I say absolute beginners, I do include people that basically come with the background of the knowledge of a particular language or maybe languages, but don't really have any kind of real life experience when it comes to web development. They're beginners in the sense of when you compare it to like a school system, when you say like, okay, so you're in second or third grade, like, yes, you're already able to read and write, but there's not really much you can achieve with that tool set yet, because there's a lot of development ahead of you, personal development in that case. So I started to think about like starting a complete new series, and this is one of them. So where I basically go into like a lot of detail on any level of full stack web development, and even going into languages, and basically you can view, or you can actually watch this as a complete beginner, and just pick up the skills along the road that are necessary to follow along, and also to develop the kind of thinking and like being able to use the tools that we need in web development on every single day. Now there are a couple of prerequisites that I assume. So you should be comfortable with your computer, you know how to install software and so on. And due to the fact that most people use Windows, I'm going to basically speak out of the perspective of Windows users. If you do use something else, I mean, if you're using Linux, then this is probably not applicable for you so much, because I just assume that then you know a thing or two about computers if you're using Linux. If you're using Mac, you will see that most things are adaptable in a certain way. I might make a comment here or there about big differences, but other than that, you will be able to adapt accordingly without any kind of problems. So since that's going to be a huge topic, I mean, I really don't know how big of a time span is required to actually teach all of the concepts. And actually, let's jump into there. Like, what do I want to go over? And so you can basically see how I've structured this. So first of all, like the setup. So what are the prerequisites on the technical base? What needs to be running on your computer in order to start working? And we're going to explain a little bit about that. Actually, that's what today's going to be about, is just the setup. And then we're gonna go like on a higher level, more conceptual. What are people talking about when they use certain terminology, and how does that fit into what I need to know to begin, and how does that relate to to actually writing applications and seeing where I want to go. Then in the third bracket, we basically going to talk about languages and markups. So we're going to talk about HTML, CSS, and then I chose PHP as the backend language, and JavaScript as the front-end language. And that is a very, very, very secure and robust stack you can work with. So just to be clear also on what we want to achieve here is this is not going to be, like any kind of we're not going to use any kind of builder. We're not going to use any kind of like, hey, this is how you work on Wix or WordPress or whatever. Like, we're going to actually go into the weeds and provide you with the tool set to write applications from scratch. Now, does that mean that one day you might, jump into a existing, I don't know, Django application and start, like adapting plugins and so on? Sure. But we're really going to start with, okay, this is how you write those kind of applications. So I mean, in a megalomaniac way, you will be able to write applications, like a GoDaddy web builder, or like Wix, or I don't know, a WordPress, and all that kind of stuff. So that's our goal. To probably not, to be honest, probably not to facilitate that in this course, but to provide you with the basis to do so. Now, then we're going to use that at my first app. So we're basically going to create an application that is going to be pretty simple. We're going to just categorize music with artists and album, and basically create a little small application that we can use in order to maintain our library of music in that case. And in theory, they could have any topic. It is just a nice possibility to facilitate a couple of common operations and so on. So that's what we're going to do. And needless to say, I think we should just jump into number 1 today, and basically talk about, okay, so what do you need to have on your computer in order to start working in such a context. And for the people that are basically a little bit bored about number 1 because they have either gone to some kind of boot camp already or whatever, just feel free to jump to the section that you want to. If you happen to be in like this has, like, is week 1, for example, it isn't out yet, be sure to hit the subscribe button. I will release a new chapter every Saturday, so it's possible that you're watching this and like no other videos than number 1 or maybe number 2 exist. All right, so let's talk about it from a high level first. So those are the things we basically want to tackle, and before we jump into it, I want to basically talk about like why, right? What's behind it. I'm not going to just give you a list of, hey, install this. Let's talk about what actually is happening here. So the first thing you will need is an IDE, and an IDE is more than a editor. So you will find a lot of editors that can do markup and highlighting and so on. Like, the huge difference between an IDE and an editor, and this is really the bread and butter, especially when you start, is that an IDE is a complete environment, right? I mean, that's what it stands for, by the way. It's integrated development environment. It's interpreting what you're writing. So, for example, like we're going to write with PHP, it will run in PHP on your code and it identify where something is not working. You can auto well, you will see that when it's happening, like when it starts suggesting what you want to do. It can be very smart. It integrates with a lot of things. It directly talks to your database. It can basically facilitate so many things for you. And I've seen a lot of people are using editors, and that basically, I think that comes from a more social background. So a lot of the tutorials you'll find online are produced in India, and there's often the problem that well, they have to be very conscious about used RAMs and all that kind of stuff, and probably software licenses and so on. So there's a reason why you see people working in Notepad. That is probably an economic reason and not a reason out of conviction. And that's important to understand, that once you've worked in an IDE, even as a very, very experienced developer, you would never jump back into an editor, because you would really not get the same benefit out of it, and simply not be as productive. And we will see that along the road. And this is basically a shout out to all the Vim users as well. I know that's very geeky and cool and so on, and you can with plugins, and I mean you can tweak it to a point where it's useful and powerful, but you will simply not ever get to the point where you can work with it with an output that is as powerful and performant as an IDE. So I would highly recommend looking into that. Now we're going to use PHPStorm, which is proprietary. So as a student, you can use it for free. If you use it for your work or in your company, then you would have to pay a license. I mean, you can get we're going to start with a 30-day free trial, so that's not going to be an issue for you right now anyway. And the reason why we use this IDE is because it's simply the best. It has a lot of flexibility when you want to grow into different kinds of technologies. I mean, I write everything in there, so it's called PHPStorm, but I mean it facilitates everything for me. I mean, whether it's JavaScript or Rust or C, I mean, you name it. I write everything in there because I can adapt the IDE, to all kinds of settings. So another prominent option is VS Code, and that's a very good IDE as well. It's getting better and better. It's not yet as powerful and good as PHPStorm, but considering it is open source, it is surprisingly well written and powerful, and certainly the second choice if for whatever reason you don't want to go with PHPStorm. Now, what is a localhost? That is something that the Mac users don't really need to worry about that much. We'll go into that. Well, actually, no. And please, if you're using Mac, read what that means for you, like how you use a localhost. For Windows users, we're going to use XAMPP, which is a Bitnami executable that basically will facilitate that for us. The reason why we're going to do that rather than installing MySQL, PHP, and Apache on our own is that the graphical user interface will make things easy for us when we were beginners, right? So it's pretty simple, to turn off the server, understand what's happening. There's PHPMyAdmin included, which again, after a while you'll probably find it too clunky, but as a beginner it makes sense to have it visualized that way so you understand what is happening. It's very straightforward, and it's just the ideal tool set to basically work with when you want to have a lot of graphical support. Node.js is probably something that everybody's heard of. If you are a beginner, that's something really confusing. So that is basically, you write JavaScript in there, and it is JavaScript. It is called Node because it basically runs the engine that your browser uses to or most browsers use to interpret your JavaScript. And facilitates that basically on a server. So Node.js is basically a server that runs JavaScript, and that's basically all it is. But on Windows, we need to install it in order to use it. We will see why we need it, even though we're not going to write a Node.js application. It is a tool you will always require. I can already promise you, because a lot of components are delivered as Node modules, and a lot of the front end stuff is best maintained by Node Package Manager (npm), and that requires Node to run. The next thing that we're going to talk about is Composer. Now, Composer is also a package manager, so just like npm, but specifically for PHP. So Composer is something we need to install components that others have developed before us, And you can imagine that, since PHP, for example, has 20 years of experience, there are a lot of very stable libraries that we can use, and even in collaboration, but we'll get into that later. It is a very useful tool, and you're probably going to package your applications yourself one day in order to share them and provide them to the community and so on. And last but not least, we're going to look into Git and GitHub. So Git and GitHub is actually, to operate it is very easy. There are a couple of commands that we will run in a terminal, and other than that, it's really not really hard to learn how to use it. However, to understand it seems to be a little bit difficult once in a while, depending on how your brain works. So on a high level, Git is a version control system, which basically means that if you make changes, you can look back into history and see where particular changes took place, and then revert them, or at least recognize where particular things have changed and so on. Now it also branches, so you can always do like, okay, I'm going to try something out now, and basically you branch out we're going to look at that visually so it makes more sense. You branch out and try out a particular path, and then see whether or not you were happy with what you tried out, and then you basically merge it back into the main branch, or not. Git can actually become very, very complicated as a concept when we talk about how do you want to work when you start collaborating, right? So as long as you work yourself, it's going to be pretty simple, and we're going to follow very, very basic rules. I'm going to say, okay, we're going to have a master branch, and whenever we implement a new feature, whatever, we're going to branch it out and send a pull request, which basically means we are trying to, or we're asking to be added to the main branch. And since we're maintaining that ourselves, we'll be able to grant that as well. Now, the good thing about that is it also manages conflicts and so on. So let's just say you try out two different things, and this is without code, a little bit hard to imagine, but just imagine you write something that contradicts what you write in a different branch, and now you want to put it together. And so Git will basically warn you about that, and you have to then can have the ability to make decisions and what you want to do about it. GitHub is a website now owned by Microsoft that enables you to host those Git repositories. That is very, very convenient because it makes you completely free from where you work, and you can basically leave one device, go over to the other, and work on your code again. It's also intended for collaboration and open source, of course. So not only can you switch, but multiple people can work simultaneously and use GitHub basically as the instance that serves your Git repositories. And there are a couple of other features. It's all a little bit like a social network, but it's not. We'll look into it. But it's certainly the heart of the at least open source development world, and you might as well, if you don't have a GitHub account, get one now. Okay. Well, I guess that's like it from a curricular perspective. Let's jump into an IDE. Okay, yeah. Here I'm on the JetBrains.com PHPStorm website, and as you can see, first of all, I agree to use the cookies. That is JetBrains is a company that I think is Czech. I'm not sure, but they've been around for a while, and they provide very, very solid tools. If you want to look into their other stuff, I highly recommend it. The only thing I will say is with the WebStorm, that doesn't really make sense. So PHPStorm includes everything that WebStorm would include and more. So WebStorm really doesn't make any kind of sense to install, even when you're not even when you're a JavaScript developer. I would consider using PHPStorm rather than WebStorm. And sorry about that. Just got some kind of emails coming in. So, actually, what you want to do, it's pretty simple. You're going to go to download. I think that makes sense. And here you can see the different installation possibilities. Again, we're going to do Windows and then click download. So as you can see, it includes a 30-day free trial. If you have a .edu email address, be sure to sign up with that. And then it's free for you forever. And if not, there are a couple of, let me see if I can find that somewhere. Might be here. Here we go. So there are a lot of possibilities to obtain this completely for free, and or at least 50% off and so on. I mean, there is a lot of wiggle room. I once was in between from because my license is paid for by my employer, and I talked to them and said, hey, listen, I have a month in between where it doesn't make sense for me to buy a year license because my employer will pay for it, and they're very understanding. So if pricing is a problem for you, just start talking to them. The actual price is also affordable. That's the yearly license. So if you need to pay for it, that should be in the realm of possibilities. Okay, so that said, I assume you'll be able to download a package, and what you see here in the background, let's actually look at that, is the installed version. So this might look different for you. This you can highly customize this. So there are a couple of things that you're going to be asked during installation. One of them is, by the way, whether or not you want to have the Java platform installed. If you simply click yes for now, if you don't have any kind of a Java runtime on your computer yet. So be sure to do that. And again, this looks, I'm using a dark mode and a plugin that actually, let me quickly see what that's called. Material design something. Wow. Okay, my RAMs are dead. Yeah, the material theme UI. So that's what I'm using. That's why it has that kind of look it has. But again, this is highly customizable, and we're going to see what it can do in a second. I'm at this point just going to introduce you to the general setup of how things look like. So on the left, you can basically see this is like your Explorer if you want. So I created a new project now called WebDev for our purposes, and so basically that would be, this doesn't include any kind of files, but if I wanted to, let's just say I've created a new HTML file that I call index, right, and say hi. So see, now you can see that the file is added here. So this is how it works. And so you've got the project on the left. You can, that's the regular setup of how things work. Again, you can highly customize that. You can have that wherever you want to. You can put that somewhere else. You can detach it. You can do all kinds of things. And But this is the regular setup. You will see that here the breadcrumb should also explain where you are in, you know, what you're watching right now. You have multiple tabs. So let's just say we have, let me create a JavaScript file here quickly and call that script. And you can see I can have multiple tabs, and I can also arrange them differently. So let's say I want to have it like this, which here's a little bit of a small space here, but I could do this, right? If and that will later on you will notice that comes in very handy if you work on things that are, you know, work together. You can basically have a different kind of overview on that. And everything you see here, like from the color scheme to the you know, like the numbers, everything you can customize. So with the settings, you can jump into like really deep you know, setting. It's even what kind of hotkeys you're using and so on. Like you can customize this to perfectly fit your needs. But that would go a little bit too far for us today. So what we want to talk about today is a little bit more of a high level. And that is, okay, so in general, let me actually close this. In general, here is basically your editing space. So this is where you're going to work with in your, while you code. Here you basically have, you know, the files that you want to navigate through or create or whatever. Then you have a terminal. So a terminal is something that when we start using, you know, Git Composer and so on, will come in very handy. We will later see why that's the case. I can also have multiple tabs of the terminal, of course. So that's basically the general setup. You will see a couple of different things here on my end. That's like the remote host. So when we talk about deployment in a later course, we will go into that a little bit. Database is the same. We will probably get to that relatively early in the process, but not now. But here I basically have my connections to databases. I have no database set up right now, so I would need to do that, but I'm not going to do that right now. So I have basically one interface that would grant me access to everything I need, including, and this is kind of a topic a little bit further ahead, but debugging and you know, test integrations and all kinds of features. So what are the big differences to like VS Code is terminology mainly. So I can create, well, let's just, for example, do live templates. So you can see how when you work on something, let's just say like I'm going to create a new HTML live template, and I'm going to call this test. And so whenever I do this, I basically say test element just as a little just as a little demo, and this works in the realm of HTML, and I do okay. So from now on, when I want to write that, so the only thing I do is this, and you can basically see that it can facilitate, you know, well, macros if you want. So in whatever shape or form I need them, depending on the framework you're using, there are plugins that facilitate a lot of that for you. And people have built many of those, and that's basically how you can go about it. I'm actually going to delete that right now because I don't need it. But this is basically how live templating works, and again, there's so much more from you know, automatically refactor to how, I mean, it's really endless. There's no use to go into a specific topic as of now, before we explore the need for certain functionality. So that's basically the gist of your IDE. And when you get to that point, what we want to talk about is, for now, the setup of particular things. So, for example, there's a built-in PHP interpreter, right? So let me just create a PHP file that I'm going to call index. And in this PHP file, I'm probably going to do something like, and you don't have to understand this at that point. I go, and then here you can see how it basically starts telling me what are the possibilities. And I say file the contents, and then I say from this very directory, please take the index HTML file. And you can see it has, all it warns me if something is not correct, and in theory it could run this. So what we want to do though is, if we go to languages and frameworks and then choose PHP, you will see that there's a CLI interpreter and it says no interpreter. So now we're basically using the built-in validation of PHPStorm. And what we want to do is we want to use an actual real PHP installation. And that's why the next thing we're going to install is our XAMPP. So what is XAMPP? XAMPP is basically a installation of PHP, or actually here you can see it, Apache MariaDB. So MariaDB is not exactly MySQL, but for like how we're going to use it, I mean, there's simply no difference. We're not going to get into a level where we'll explore any differences, but for now it's a little bit lighter than MySQL. PHP and Perl we will not need, but nonetheless it is packaged with it. And what we basically are going to do is, here again, I'm just going to install this. And from now on, there are two things you need to consider. So first of all, if you have the possibility, or if you are the local admin on your PC, then please install it in C. You can also basically see that's how I have set this up. So this is in C, XAMPP, htdocs, webdev. And if you are not a local user, you will have to install that in your, not a local admin, sorry. You have to install that in your user realm. So, I think it's Windows users, your username. But if you have the possibility, definitely run it on that level. So how does it look like? Let me see if I don't have it open. Hold on, my screen capture is really slowing down my computer. So this is how it looks like. If you run this control panel as an administrator, you have the possibility to set those marks here. In which case, that runs as a service, which means that when Windows starts, those will already run. So let's quickly see what we have here. So here's my Apache. That's the actual server, right? You can see those are the ports, and that's pretty normal. So what this is, basically, whenever you visit a web page that is HTTP, so without SSL certificate, that is the default port that you're using. And whenever you use SSL, this is the default port that you're using. So whenever a URL starts with HTTPS, this is what you're using. And MySQL, that's not really important because we don't talk to that through the browser. We talk to that from the PHP side, but that runs on 3306, and it could run on different locations as well. That's really not important. FileZilla, that's a FTP. Basically, the rest of this is for mailing and all kinds of stuff. We don't need any of this, and probably ever. But what we need is the Apache and the MySQL. So if we were to now basically go to localhost, let's simply do that and say localhost, and just like that. All right, then we can see the same thing that we just saw online runs here. And the difference is that this is in reality, this is 192.168.0.0, yeah, probably. Probably not. Oh, because it's not. It's 120. Yes, I'm wrong. Localhost is 127. Ah, I haven't had enough coffee. But anyway, in reality, that's a particular IP, and so this is not the internet. This runs on your machine. This is directly served by Apache, right? Which basically means apparently, you know, they have kind of a startup page that you can find in your XAMPP htdocs folder. So, and then MySQL again is the database. So this basically runs. Now this is I think they're collaborating with Bitnami, yes, and you can basically install all kinds of stuff from the Bitnami you know, platform. You know, maybe WordPress, Drupal, Joomla, whatever. They have a lot of things. We're not going to worry about that at all because that's exactly not what we want to do. We don't want to use applications that are already built. We want to you know, learn how to build our own stuff. This is maybe interesting a little bit. So what you see here is a setup of okay, this is the actual PHP running. You can see the version. That's pretty modern. I mean, 0.4 is going to be released very soon, and you can basically see the stuff that is installed. So there will be a lot of things that don't really mean anything to you as of now, but we might, you know, get into at least on the high level understand. For example, okay, there's a local value and a master value. Because we have the ability to change things on the fly. So the INI basically just gives us the general setup, or there will be an env in you know, other systems. We're going to work with Apache for now, and so you can basically, while your PHP is running, make changes to that if you need, you know, like a particular script to run longer and so on. And here's the PHPMyAdmin. We talked about that, and this is maybe something that is interesting for us right now. So that is a graphical user interface of a relational database. So we're going to talk about that in a second. For now, let's go back to XAMPP and basically understand that, okay, so our localhost should be running. So here I have created, again, a new project, and that basically just happens here, or when you start PHPStorm for the first time, it will ask you. So I recommend that you use the path that is directly wherever your XAMPP is running. That's not a requirement. You can also have that somewhere else, but then you would have to sync basically with your localhost. You want to avoid that for now. If you've already done that, make a change right now. If you're interested in how that works, there is also, if you go into deployment, tools, deployment, configuration, you can have basically, let's just assume a local or mounted folder, and then basically point that folder here and automatically sync those files. But I mean, there's very little reason when you work locally to do that. What you really want to do is directly work in a subfolder of htdocs. Okay, which means that if this is installed, then I should be able to go to localhost webdev and basically directly already see the error that's happening here. And that should solve it in that case. Okay, so it says hi here because that is the only content I had. Maybe let's quickly create a welcome. This works. And I basically see, okay, I am serving this information right now. So again, you don't worry about it if you don't understand how HTML works yet. We will get to that in a later example. Right now, we're just interested in being able to actually run anything here. So even if I create a text file, let's do that maybe, and say test text. Hi there. Okay, so I should be able to directly serve that, as you can see. So that's basically what you can do in order to verify that this is functioning. Be a little bit careful of what you test here. Sometimes your browser starts downloading rather than displaying, but nonetheless that proves that it's working. So jumping back to our settings, I can basically now choose the interpreter. This is understands how what you have installed. It might be possible that you need to press this button here, and here pointed to the PHP executable. So here you can see that's in my XAMPP PHP executable, and here it also loads the ini file, which is something that we're going to look into in the XAMPP in a second. So here I choose this, I click OK, and basically now I'm using the actual PHP executable in order to verify what's happening here. Okay, let's jump back into our control panel and see what is an ini. So we have already looked at the PHP info. So as you can see, I can basically here start and stop. Here's admin, but what we really want to do is the config, and here I have a this is for routing. Don't touch that for now. We're going to go into that later. And but here's the PHP ini, and this is basically where you set the settings that we have looked before. You don't really need to understand too much about that. I just want you to know where to find it in case you are, for example, when you're Googling something and so on, and notice that, the script time runs out or whatever, I can only post 2 megabytes, the usual problems. If you install xdebug and all that kind of stuff, this is where you find this file. Of course, you can, again, you will probably not use this in the long run. You can always basically say, hey, I would like to do this differently, and open it in the editor. And if I do that, then it's a little bit easier to read, and I can to find things better. So when I basically say max post max file size, there we go, and basically say, okay, so here 800 megs is what I can upload without it breaking. This is, I can set all kinds of things on this in this ini file. If I make changes here, interesting to know is that you then need to restart the Apache. So if I make changes here, I should basically stop the Apache and restart it again. And if I don't do that, then of course I don't need to. So the last thing that is interesting to know is that we are using a interpreted language. So that's when we're going to jump into development, we will notice that we don't need to compile anything. If you are using different languages, like, I don't know, C-based languages and so on, the process will be a little bit more complicated. And I don't think we will need to go into that, but just so you know that in theory, there are interpreted languages and compiled languages. Okay, let's take a short break here and go on with the stuff that we need to install. So the next thing we're going to take is Node.js, and you can basically see, I mean, here is the automatically, apparently, because I'm running Windows, it asks me whether or not I want to download the for Windows x64. I hope this works nice for you, but if that makes wrong assumptions, just like go on downloads and find the right installer yourself, and that should work fine. So once you ran that, you can verify whether or not that's installed in your terminal. So if I basically, wherever I am, I do node v, and you can basically see, okay, I get the version, so the node command seems to work. And let's see if the package manager works. npm v, and it should be like 6 something, right? Yep. So that looks good. So now we know everything is installed correctly from the node perspective. And if you have problems running that happens, then that's usually something with a path variable. So how Windows basically works is that those kind of commands, those are not native Windows commands, as you can see. So there needs to be a, and let me actually see if I can just open that up without exposing anything that I don't want to share here. Okay. All right. So what you basically do is you just open your Windows and say like search for change system environment variables, and then this should come up. And as you can see, the path basically is one of those variables, and this is basically where you have to verify that if I go to edit, that things are in there. So as you can see, npm for me here is in here. A couple of those things, like, okay, that's cargo, that's for Rust, I mean, that's for Composer, that's PHPStorm. So I mean, if you don't find this in here, then that's a good reason why things aren't working for you. So please Google how to add Node and npm to the path, and you should be good on that. And those are the common problems. That is also true for other systems. So path variables are a thing in Linux and Mac OS as well. So please Google accordingly if that should not work for you. Last but not least, if you change the path variable, don't forget that you probably have to restart the terminal. So this will still not work for you. So you need to start a new terminal in order to test whether or not those changes did anything for you. Okay, so the last thing we're going to install is Git. Right. So let's do this. And here the same thing. So you're just going to basically going to download what you need. So Git assumes that you're using it on a command line outside of any IDE. So it's also gonna ask you to install Git Bash and all those kind of things. And just make sure, I kind of forgot what what the questions are during the installation. But make sure that you do not overwrite any kind of Windows commands. It'll warn you accordingly. I think by now Nano is the regular editor it's using, but it could have changed by now. I don't really know. But just be aware that you probably not going to end up using it anyway, because we're going to use the terminal in PHPStorm. but you know, choose accordingly. And there's this one choice where there's a warning of hey, this overwrites you know, Windows commands. Don't choose that one, but I think that should be clear. So once that's done, we can do basically the same. So let's just see if that works. It doesn't, because apparently this needs to be either big or versioned. Jesus Christ, sorry about that. Hello? No idea why this is happening. Put on insert. Okay. What the? Okay. So apparently we have to do version. Fair enough. And here you can see this is the Git Windows version, so everything works fine. Once that's the case, again, I'm going to go to my settings, and I have my version control here. And here I can choose Git, and as you can see, it's the same thing. So this is auto detected, so this might simply work for you. If not, point it to the executable, where it's completely jumps away. I'm going to ignore that for now. And this should basically tell you the same. And those, don't worry about those right now. They should be set fine for our purposes, and we're going to get into that later. Now, GitHub requires a token that you will basically be prompted when you use it the first time, so don't worry about that right now. Okay, so, but nonetheless, do sign up for GitHub at this point, and then we should basically be all ready. So let me go back to the checklist and see if we have everything. So we've got, oh yeah, we are still missing Composer. Fair enough. So same thing here. Okay, Composer is that .org. Right, so same thing here. We're going to go to download and download it accordingly. So in that case, I'm going to use the Windows installer, and I should basically be good. And by now, you know exactly what happens. So you basically check whether or not, you know, this exists. And then you can see, oh, I'm actually surprised. They normally have those really nice you know, ASCII art, but apparently not. So is it maybe? Is it maybe here? Yeah, don't. All right. Okay. Anyway, so now we have that, and we're going to use all of those quickly now, just to you know, get a little bit of a feeling of what it actually means, right? So the first thing we installed is Node with npm, and so why do we need npm? Let's actually quickly find a nice npm package. js.com. Let's just go there and see what we could potentially do. And I have very little idea of what makes sense as a very simple package. You know what? I know what we're going to do. We're going to do lorem ipsum. That's not exactly what I meant. Lorem fill. Yeah, that's okay. So here you can see this is already the instructions of how to install it. So I'm going to run npm. You will find it on every you know, repository, as you can see here as well. So this is a package you want to install. What does this do? This is a placeholder text. So if let's actually just simply do it and see. So npm I, and what does it say? Digital villainy lorem fill. Let's just copy and paste that. So this will create a Node modules folder. If it finally does. And then, you know, starts downloading the prerequisites and everything I need. There's actually how many dependencies? Just 6. Yeah, those should be dev dependencies, but that's a different question. Okay, so what does this do? Oh, there we go. So, okay. So I'm using it in this case, so I'm going to take this version, and let me just verify that that's even the case. So, oh, it's still downloading. Let's take this script and include it in my index. I'm gonna put that in at the end of the body in that case. And so here, PG, I assume that's paragraph 5. Let's do that. Oh, what do we have here? Oh, okay, no, that's fine. We have not initiated the package. That's perfectly fine. So let's do this here. And so now we should have an empty paragraph. And let's test that in our, we don't actually have that open. Let's go back then and say localhost webdev. And you can see how it is generating those 5 paragraphs. So that's basically how we use the npm module. And that is basically the first example of how we can use, you know, in that case, JavaScript. That is, and you can see there's a lot of things happening here, probably way too much. And here is the file that we're including. So that's the functionality we're using. Okay, so that's for npm. Now let's look for a example in Composer. So a Composer package could do all kinds of things for us. Let's basically see what we can do here as an example. So let's, you know what? We are going to install something that we will actually use. So Composer require, and in that case, is that already a package? I think so. No, it's Neon 3 apps ops. Again, I'm sorry for the RAMs. The screen capture software is really killing my PC here. So everything's a little bit clunky. Okay. So as you can see now, a vendor file was created. And so what Composer does, it generates an autoload file. That's the file we want to include. So again, don't worry if this is a little bit, you know, over your head for now, but just so you know. So I'm going to say require once directory, and say vendor autoload PHP. So what is interesting for us to understand is that if I run this, and this is actually very interesting to understand. Let's simply do something like this. then this is something that normally does not happen. Okay, those are already settings that I have applied because I always want to run PHP. It is more likely that you will run the index.html, which in that case this would not show up, right? So because now we have an index PHP and an index HTML. So let's make sure that here we actually are running this accordingly. So now we have loaded this, and now instead basically of using the onboarded file get contents, we're actually going to use what we just installed. So that would be the Neon 3 apps ops, and then I say embrace from file, and should have basically left that there, and basically have to say index.html. Right, so this needs another parameter. It's gonna be an empty array for now. Now let's see what happens. So here it says I cannot find index.html. Well, why is that the case? Well, because this naturally goes to the root of what PHP interprets as the root, and that is not the web root, right? So that would look for in htdocs, not in webdev, which basically means we're going to do the same as we did above and say, well, going on from this very directory, we want to load it. Oops, index.html. And this should actually work. XAMPP, htdocs, webdev, index.html. Are you too picky? Are you too picky? That's actually a good question. Why doesn't this work? It's exactly the right file, isn't it? htdocs webdev index.html. It's this one here. Is it not? Just check something quickly. Okay. That's because I'm missing path. Okay. Sorry about that. That is probably a little bit confusing, and I wanted to avoid that, but it is what it is, unfortunately. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, we should have looked at that package before. But so now we're basically, using functionality, and we can see the output is there. So let's just quickly verify that this works and say variable, and then let's go here and change that accordingly. Say variable is my test. Okay, and I can see it works fine. Okay, So that would be a use of Composer. And how Git works is something that we are going to explore in GitHub. The reason for that is also pretty simple. In the next step, we are actually going to use the, like what we've built up so far and jump into action. So in order to facilitate that, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to, should you have tested anything here, clear all of that. Just throw it away. Just throw it away. You don't need any of that. And that might scream at you. But so the next thing you want to do is you want to go into GitHub and start cloning a couple of things. So we will set up a new project now. The first thing that I want you to do is there's one package that I want you to install globally. So whenever we're here, we can see that there's an npm I or npm install, and then there's a particular package. And as you could saw, that put the package in the actual project. What we want to do now is we want to install a package that runs on a level higher, and that is the Neon 3 CLI. So I do npm I, and then I give it a flag G, and do Neon 3 CLI. So what happens here is you will not find that here in the project. And as soon as that's done, let's wait a second. Sorry for the lack of speed here. Okay, as soon as that's done, I now have another command at my disposal. So if I say Neon 3 version, then I can basically see, okay, that's 225. So now I basically have a new command at my disposal that I can use in the terminal regardless of where I am. As you can see, it did not install any kind of node modules here. Okay, so that being done, let's jump over to GitHub. So what do we find in GitHub? Now this is on my personal account here, but that doesn't matter. So the first thing you probably want to do is, if this is how your account looks like, so first thing you want to do is you're going to press that little plus here and say new repository. And you're going to create a name for it, like however that's going to be. So this is going to be your username, or if you are part of an organization, you have a couple of more options. And then you basically put in the name, and don't forget that it needs to be URL safe. Then you can add a description, and then you simply say public. Nowadays you can do private if it's your own, if you're the owner, still in the free package, and you do not want to check this. Don't check this. Don't add any kind of files here on GitHub. Just create the repository. And if you've done that, let's actually test this now and say, so I'm going to call this web dev. And in my case, I'm going to set that private because I don't want people to, stumble upon that and wonder what that is. Create the repository. And this is basically already telling you how to do that if you don't have an IDE, but we can ignore this from now. So this is all we need to do. The only thing that we're going to do is here, we're going to leave this on HTTPS and copy this, right? Copy this. So in my PHPStorm, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to Tools, and actually, sorry, I'm going to go to Version Control System, VCS, and I say check out from version control, Git. I'm going to paste this in, and press clone. Now, if you have not cleared that, it will warn you that this exists. So make sure that before you do that, clear everything that's in there. Directory exists and not empty. It still does it because of external libraries and kind of stuff. Okay. I don't want to have too much of confusion here. So what I'm going to do is I'm literally going to flush this project with my editor. Whoops, it opened here. So let's quickly do that and say C XAMPP htdocs, and we called it webdev. So, and this is the .ide. So I hope this doesn't really break anything. We'll see it in a second. And I'm going to do that again. And say checkout from version control. Do this, and it will work. Would you like to open the directory? Yes, I mean, ironically, we're in that directory. So in this window, it's fine. A little bit confused about that, but it worked. So it is very likely that in your case, there was another screen and asking for authorization, and then you have to log in with your GitHub account. So as soon as that's done, then PHPStorm will save a token. And as you can see going forward, I don't need to answer those questions anymore. So what you also see is a couple of new things appeared here, right? So now I can basically revert, I can commit, and I can update. So the first thing we're probably going to do is we are going to make a very, very simple example. So I'm going to again create a new file and call it index. Okay, so now this dialog comes up. So you might want to consider doing this. That depends. I don't do it, but so what you definitely want to add it in this case. If you decide not to do that, then you basically see now it gets green. You can basically like use this command, Control-Alt-A, in order to add files or a file, and that's basically happening under the hood for you. So let's just quickly do H1 and say hi there. Okay, so whoops, no, let's not do that with a keyboard. So now I made some changes here, and I can click on commit, and basically, okay, those are the changes. So this is my version compared to a non-existing version, so I don't see anything here. So this is my version, and this is basically what I added, and this is the particular content. And now I can basically say, okay, what is this? I'm going to call this add first test. And so I can commit this and go on, right? I can also commit and push, which basically means first I commit it locally to my Git, and then I already push it to GitHub in order to have it put into the remote repository. So a couple of things to say about this before I go ahead is you have the possibility to reformat code. That is something that you probably want to do, and then set your code style. Let's actually do that quickly. So in the settings, there's something called code style, right? Code style. I'm kind of surprised that this doesn't show up like that, but okay. It should be here. Yeah, that's better. And then you can go into the particular languages, right? So, okay, how are certain things behaving and so on. So you can go really, really deep into this. I would recommend just to set this, from PHPStorm 1, PHPStorm 2, and you're going to be good for now. But if you ever want to explore that, like this, it's super finicky about, you can set everything you can possibly imagine in every language that you would possibly use, right? So you probably want to do that. In that case, I'm happy with how this looks like. So let's jump back into the commit message and say, okay, yes, I am happy with that, and I want to commit and push. Okay, so this is the push command. It says, okay, here you go. It just includes one commit in that case. That is also correct. Let's push it. So a lot of things happen under the hood with that you can do also here with Git commands. If you're used to that, feel free to do so. And what I can see now is if I were to reload this, then all of a sudden I see, okay, actually there is a index file in here now, right? And I can look at that and see, okay, this exists, and I can check that out, and I basically have that wherever I am. So what we notice now is that, well, wait a second, there seems to be only one branch, right? So only a master. And what branching means, I mean, we started talking about that. We're going to go into that a little bit more. But what I can tell you for now is just follow one rule for now. Never push to master, right? So what we just did here, that's fine for testing purposes, but we actually don't want to do that. Master is something where only tested things have run through, and that's how we're going to go about it. But for now, we're happy with that. So we do have our first repository. That's pretty awesome, and we can basically start going from there into the next topic. And I think that's basically it for today. So we walked through all the prerequisites that we need in order to get started. Please, if you have additional questions and comments, or if there's something that didn't work out for you, just write that in the comments. I will address them accordingly, and so that next week or whenever you're going to watch it, we can jump into starting to become developers. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to subscribe if you're interested in keeping on working, and I would recommend taking an hour or two on next Saturday in order to get started. Thanks for watching, and you have a great weekend.